Hi. So my name is Cora. I'm from a little village close to Barcelona, and I have been in Berlin for many years, and I've always been doing painting, and now I'm working on my Meister project for the Weissensee, the Kunsthochschule. So the work I wanted to show here, because it's the one thing that I'm focusing the most on right now, because I have this deadline that I'm working towards in July, I thought that I will just focus on this one thing because it's going to occupy most of my time until then. So, yeah. This is a sample of previous projects of mine, which goes to show I have a background in philosophy and comparative literature. So the way I work often is around topics or concepts. So there is something that I feel is worth discussing collectively or worth shining a light on. And then somehow I find a way to merge words and images together. It just comes very natural to me because that's my background. So this, for instance, was a project on identity, and it normally involves a lot of research and writing and taking notes and sketching. And then somehow it comes out in a way that the visual and the literary come together. So this is the one. And then there's this other example which applies to the same thing. This was very important for me because nature is a very big influence in my life altogether and in my work. I was really shocked by certain things like new trends, like the glamping notions or this idea of nature being at the service of people. This was very infuriating for me in a way, so I started reading a lot of works from other artists and research and sociologists most of all, and then from all these reads that I do, then somehow there is a point where something clicks in my mind, and then I just find a way to illustrate them, and the result comes out like that. But the project that I mentioned that I'm working on and that I'm going to be working on for a really long while is the one here. This is my studio, and yeah, I'll keep telling you more about it, but right now it's mostly portraits that I'm doing, which is very rare for me. I don't often do that, but for the purpose of this project, it was very important for me to tribute these people. So this is some of the people that I'm doing. I'm doing a series of 21 portraits with the purpose of researching on the relationships between mental illnesses and creativity, which kind of relationships that may be and how many and to what extent they influence one another or not. But it was specifically important for me. It's a very project very near to my heart because my mother did have a mental illness herself. So it's always something I wondered, how is it possible that there are so many women in my life that are doing art and somehow there's so little documentation about them? And because of that I realized that very early on in my life, maybe it led to me always being more curious about these women, so they ended up being the people that influenced me the most. So right now, all these women, they suffered, some more than others, but all of them to some extent, under some mental illnesses. So I wanted to somewhat tribute them and find a way that maybe, kind of draw a line that connects all of them and all of their lives together. So I'm trying to understand if there's a connection between these mental illnesses and their works. I'm trying to answer certain questions like, were they born that way or did they live a life that led them to become that way? So I'm portraiting these women as some kind of a tribute. These are unfinished works. As you see, I'm drawing on the frame always, like this is inside the canvas, but I always want to play with the framing. And there is always some part of every portrait that I'm leaving white, which is for me some kind of representation of this little thing, whichever it was, that was missing for them in order to be a part of the society they were born into. So these are some examples, and these are some other. What I'm doing also often is I'm collaging on the canvases once they are finished, when I feel like I'm finished with the painting, and I'm also knitting on them, which you cannot really see here because they're still under construction, so to speak, but there's gonna be a lot of like very detailed knitting work, which for me is kind of meditative in a way. I really enjoy doing that. And so yeah, this is kind of how it looks. Oh, this is not a really good quality. I don't know what happened, but yeah, that's how my studio looks right now. And these are some of the portraits that I've finished. Well, not really finished, but like the painted part of it, it's somewhat finished, I believe. So what's very interesting for me, here you can see the threads that I'm using to knit. What's very interesting for me is that at some point, while I'm painting, there's all this research about these women's lives, and I'm reading things that they have written themselves or that close people have said or written about them also. And it's I have all these pictures of them and biographies and what have you. And at some point it's gonna sound like I have some visions or something, but I feel like these women are with me in my studio, and it gets really interesting because it brings me to think about how they would like to be portrayed and how they would like to come across. And it's like it's a very intricate, difficult to explain feeling, but I'm constantly having this impression that I'm actually getting to know them in a way. And all of these women are unfortunately dead. I would have never had the chance to meet them even if I wanted to. But I feel like I do through this process in a way, which is very interesting, and I really enjoy it. It gets creepy sometimes in the evenings with all these eyes looking at me sometimes, but yeah, it's like we're growing together in a very strange way. And there's, for instance, Nina Simone, who is someone that has very strongly influenced me. And I can't help but find the irony in this, that I don't believe that she would like me to paint her at all. And I'm doing it nonetheless. And I wonder how she would react if she would see me. And I have all these feelings going through my head and through my entire body when I'm working, and it's great. So I'm really enjoying that. And this is sort of how I would like to look, for the project to look in the end. So the main painting in the center is going to be a very big one, and this is going to be a portrait of my mother. That's her name. And then I'm going to place the other portraits side and side from it. And so what I'm working on is also creating like a very Rococo Baroque frame for my mother's painting, which is the one that I'm going to invest the most time on. And then there is this kind of sculpture or installation. I don't know how you can even name that, but what I want to do is place some kind of bar on the bottom and then collage. I usually work with collage a lot, and I really struggle to stick with the 2D. Like I can work 2D, but I always need to add something to that. So either I edit a book that goes with it, or I make a sculpture that is placed in front of it. But I feel like I always need like something that is more three-dimensional to really show the whole spectrum of the things I'm talking about. So these things that I'm gonna place on like this kind of metal tubes is very irrational, playful things that I'm working on very intuitively. I'm just cutting papers and finding things that I don't know, that I did as a child, or just completely shutting down my brain and just putting papers together, colors together. And the more I make, the more rests I have from things. So at some points, I find myself surrounded by like piles of very tiny pieces of tons of different colors. And then I just keep putting them together, and they come up in really weird shapes. So what I want to have with that is this effect that all these things to me represent kind of, yeah, the naive or the kind of terrestrial things like nature, flowers, people, kids playing, the living. And this is going to be on the ground. And then you have the contrast of the wall pieces, which is people who unfortunately are no longer with us. So I want to play with this contrast on this line, also this very thin line between sanity and insanity and being here and not being here. This is how I want to present the work in a way. So yeah, these are the pieces that I want to put together, and I want to stick them to this kind of like, I don't know how you call that in English, but this like metal Draht in German, like metal sticks, so to speak, in a way that they make like a paper forest. So it's going to be very full of a bunch of these things like that. Or, I mean, I don't know if you can appreciate that here, but this is such an impressive amount of little papers, and it's so much fun to work like that. It's, yeah, I'm really enjoying doing that. So yeah, this is it. These are the goals. For my project, this is the main thing I wanted to understand through that. So this whole process and this whole research, which for me now is very sentimental, but at some point I would like for it to be more neuroscientific, maybe even, is to understand how is it possible that so many people in the history of arts have suffered from mental illnesses, and why are men who have had such issues perceived as geniuses, and why are women perceived as completely crazy and not worth looking at their works at all whatsoever. So I wanted to research on that. Also mostly tribute all these women that are very important to me, and yeah, all the things that I've already mentioned. These are some of my sources. I spent great amount of time in the Collection de l'Art Brut in Lausanne, which was really amazing for me. I really enjoyed it. And then I'm always constantly analyzing the works of people who suffer from whichever kind of mental issue, from autism to whatever else. And yeah, I find great, I don't know if influence, I don't think that I can compare my work to their works in any way, but it's like great solace in seeing how they can project all these things and put all their sorrows away through their art. And this is really soothing for me to see. So I keep researching on that and like soaking all of this in all the time. And yeah, I think this is it for now, at least. I'm gonna show all this work in July in the Cool House. And so I'm hoping that it will be done until then. Maybe it's a little bit unrealistic, but I'm gonna try to make it work. So yeah, this is it. Thanks for being here.
Through your research, would you say that artists create because of their illness or in spite of their illness?
I don't really have an answer to that. What I have seen, there is this parallelism between all these women's lives, is that they did show very early signs of mental illnesses, but they were not treated for them until much later in their lives. And all of them, what they all had as well, is very, very complicated lives from the very beginning. So it's very hard in these cases to know if it's, to what extent, what came first. It's really, really tricky. I believe it's just both. I believe that possibly you have something that is not feeling right, and then you discover art through it, and then you just can't stop anymore because it's so helpful, and it just feels right.
Yeah, and in relation to that question, would you say that this was sort of therapeutic for them, creating?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. Yeah, the same way that it's therapeutic for me to tribute them through my work as well. It's like, I mean, the thing with my mother, for instance, she's not with us anymore, so it's a way for me to cope with that as well without realizing it. But at a certain point, you're looking at these women's faces all the time and thinking about their lives and their circumstances and their backgrounds, and you develop certain type of empathy that you wouldn't if you would not dedicate this time into trying to understand what happened to them and what made them become who they were. So it is therapeutic for me as well. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, I got one question myself.
Mm-hmm.
I just wondered, through the research, what sort of a conclusion have you came up? Because the question, women are crazy and men are geniuses. You did some research regarding that, so what has come up? I was just interested in that.
Yeah, I do not have a conclusion on that either, because it's an ongoing research. And as I said, like until now, I have more been focused on how I'm feeling about it than the whole other perception on things. So what I really want to do is talk to psychiatric institutions about how they feel about it. Like what is their percentage in patients? Are there more women than men or not? And how do these patients talk about their own treatment there? How do they feel about their stays in these centers? And how do the professionals feel about the whole thing altogether? Like, do women feel that there's more stigma on them than there is on the male patients or not? Is this something that has been abolished? Honestly, for me, I can only do very humble research, so I need a lot of other sources and professionals to tell me their insights on that. Why, on the question on why this has happened, why men were perceived as genius and women were perceived as crazy, I think this applies to many other things that have happened in the history of mankind. Why were women suffering from so many more injustices than men? I don't know.
That's fine.
Yeah, it's just shit that happened.
Yeah. I just wondered if you have any sort of a nice conclusion already.
Yeah.
Because I would like to know that myself.
Yeah. Well, I can get back to you on that later.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
So you have like a plan, a preconceived plan. In a way, you know how many works, how they will be exhibited.
Yeah.
And you know a lot of information before making before actually creating making the works. In the making, what was the biggest problem? Was there something unexpected that that was was and is a major problem in the finalizing and completing this series of works?
Well, the thing is, I don't really have such a clear plan when I begin. I don't know. I start drawing and sketching and writing, and maybe I start with like a sketched portrait, and then it turns to a painting, and then just keep going. And that there's this realization at some point, like this, I don't know, turn in my head that says, this is how it needs to look like in the end. And that's when shit hits the fan, because that gets really tricky, because normally like my idea on how it needs to look like is technically very complicated to achieve. It's like massive canvases, which are very hard to transport, or working with techniques that I've never worked with, and having to learn all about them. So in terms of technique, yes, it's always a challenge. But it's also what makes it the biggest, I don't know, like the biggest sarcastic part of my work, that I have this clear idea on how I would want it to look, and then I have no idea on how to make it happen, and it's like a trial and error all the time, and I fail. But because I have already achieved, I have come to this point of visualization on how I want it to look, I can't give it up until it's somewhat resembling what I had in mind. So this is very challenging. Sometimes I wish that I could just stick to like the previous process of just sketching and enjoying it without a perceived idea. But at the same time, it pushes me to always keep learning something new, and I enjoy that as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions? Okay.
Hi, just
Hi.
a quick question. What is your take, or do you think mental illness is romanticized in art, and what is your take on that?
I think definitely. What my take is that not that it should not be talked about, but there should be a certain level of awareness that a lot of people lack. I feel like it's very easy for people to be like, oh, this person is schizophrenic, or this person has this or that, therefore their art is interesting. or it's like the same notion on whatever appears violent enough or striking enough. It's systematically very interesting, but nobody stops to wonder why is this more interesting than anything else. So I don't think that there should be less of the art brute circulating in the world. On the contrary, I think that the way that it's consumed and perceived should really shift. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the questions, and I've got the last one. And I just wondered, working on this topic, is it better in Berlin, or do you think would be somewhere else better place to work on it?
I don't know. I do encounter an interesting amount of people in the street who are questioning mental health.
You see?
Which is interesting and a lot of fun sometimes. But I don't know, there's certainly more resources here than there is in Spain, for instance.
Okay.
Regarding that, I feel like there's many more alternative therapies and many different initiatives that one can pursue if one is experiencing anything in the like any breakdown or depression or what have you. I feel like it's more openly talked about and discussed here, whereas in Spain, there's no resources, there's no means, unless you have a lot of money and then you can afford like private health or whatever. The most cases end up in being highly medicated and locked up in a place. And I feel like this is very different here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we have one more question. Sorry.
Hi. Yeah, I don't know a lot about art, but do you feel like this difference between men and women in the mentally ill, is it also in art in general? Like men's work is more appreciated, do you feel, in general art, or is that just for mentally ill?
I feel like it applies to art in general, although hopefully we're achieving a change in that. But definitely in terms of mental health, yes, I feel what the romanticism that we talked about, it's much more common for it to happen amongst men than women. Like it's much more common for someone to feel like an artist who is a guy and has a mental illness is interesting, and a woman who is an artist but has a mental illness is probably disturbed. And that's all there is to it. I feel like there's still this misconception that not a lot of people will admit having, but is there. It's also in the art scene in general, but not so much. And I should hope that this is changing in our present, and hopefully it will continue to change for the best.
And do you think like the number of art geniuses actually in the past of men and women were similar, and just the women were not appreciated? Or
yeah, this is also something that is very interesting and has been very interesting for me, because I was in art institutions or education institutions for all my life pretty much. And I've always learned so much more in the schools about male artists, but because of my curiosity and my background and the fact that my own mother had a mental illness, the people that influenced me the most were actually women. So I spent all my life in these institutions wondering, where are all these women who have shaped me? And we're not talking about them at all. Like most people don't know these names, or they know like 2 or 3 of them. And one of the biggest challenge for me when choosing the format of this project was that if I would have time and space and money for it, I would not tribute 20 women, I would tribute 40 or maybe more. I don't know, the list is endless. But when I ask people about artists who have influenced them, most people, they can only name a couple of women because they have not learned about female artists ever. So yeah, I believe that probably the number of female artists was less because they had less resources, less recognition, and probably a lot of men, not a lot, but a decent amount of men stealing their works and taking recognition for it, which has happened a lot in history. But so probably there were less female artists, but if the context and the situation would have been different, I believe that it would have been equal, or maybe there would actually have been more women than men, which is the case in art institutions. In my schools, there was always more girls studying than guys. But there's many more guys who have made it in the art world in the long run, which was also, of course, very surprising for me always.
Like even nowadays, you feel, or before, you mean?
What I have seen until now is that, but I do feel like it's changing. Yeah. I hope so.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank
for the
you.
questions. Thank you.